Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, the atheists, the agnostics, the Hindus, the Buddhists, and yes, even you Rastafarians who are watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, David Wood, and with me now is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the author of a lot of books, including Jesus Interrupted, Misquoting Jesus, God's Problem, which is on the problem of evil, and many others. Dr. Ehrman, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
By the way, for the benefit of all people everywhere, I usually hear Bart Ehrman, but I've also heard Bart Ehrman. So is there a definitive way of saying that?
My family says Ehrman. It originally was Ehrman. It was Auf Deutsch, but we say Ehrman. We've anglicized it.
Ehrman?
Ehrman, yeah.
Okay, we'll go with that. And I'll probably get it wrong anyway. All right, Dr. Ehrman, well, you have a debate coming up next month with Dr. Mike Licona on the resurrection of Jesus. I want to take everyone to that page here in a second, just so they can know how to register for that debate. And I've talked to the apostate prophet whose program you've been on, and I think we're going to go live afterwards so that everyone can have a discussion after watching the debate on our channels. And so our viewer, the idea would be our viewers can watch the debate and then they can meet up with us and have a discussion afterwards. So that should be a fun day. But before we jump into that, why don't you give everyone a little introduction into where you started and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, okay. So, this will only take 45 minutes. You don't mind, do I?
We're good.
So, the brief thing is, I was raised in a Christian household. I was raised Episcopalian. When I was in high school, I had a born-again experience when I was 15 and became an evangelical Christian, and then became a very conservative evangelical. And after high school, I went to Moody Bible Institute, which is a fundamentalist Bible college, and loved it, absolutely loved it, thrived on it. After that, I went to Wheaton College to finish my degree, which is a Christian liberal arts college, of course, and I loved that too. I became really interested in the Greek language. I took Greek at Wheaton, and I went to Princeton Theological Seminary because I wanted to study Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. And my mentor was Bruce Metzger, who was the greatest textual scholar in the country and arguably in the world. And so I wanted to study with him. While I was at Princeton, I started studying the Bible more intensely, reading the New Testament in Greek and the Old Testament in Hebrew. And I started recognizing that my view of the inerrancy of the Bible was problematic. I started seeing that there are, in fact, problems in the Bible, contradictions and mistakes of various kinds. I eventually left my fundamentalist faith and I remained an evangelical for a while, and then after a while, I had trouble remaining evangelical. I was a liberal Christian maybe for 13 or 15 years after that, but maybe about, 25 years or so ago, 30 years ago, I decided I just didn't believe at all, not because of my biblical scholarship, but because I was wrestling with this problem you mentioned earlier, the problem of evil, and how you can explain this world if there's a God who's in control of it. And, I knew all the answers, the people have said, but I eventually became an agnostic. And so now that's what I am. I'm agnostic, atheist, biblical scholar, which makes me a rather rare creature. Not too many of us around, but I'm a scholar of the historical Jesus in the New Testament, but I'm not a believer myself.
Mm-hmm. And you have coming up with Mike Licona on March 9th. In fact, let me go ahead and pull this up here. You have a debate next month on April 9th, 2022 with Mike Licona. Now, I'm looking at the time here, and it's 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Are you guys actually having a 7-hour debate?
We are. So there is a lunch break. And so, but I mean, we, the thing is, I've done a lot of debates. and Mike has too. And the debates are always very frustrating because you get up and you do your 20-minute spiel, then he does his 20-minute spiel, then you have a 10-minute response. He has a 10. They take questions, and it's like you don't have time to develop any ideas. It's just like bam, bam, bam. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting where you can actually develop your argument? And so not in a boring way, like not in the way like, oh my God, I'm going to, it's like, but it's like, there's so much involved in this. And so we'll be doing different things, talking about different things, and trying to show what our positions are. Mike is also a New Testament scholar, a PhD in New Testament, who's written a large book on the resurrection. And we completely we respect each other and we're friends, and we completely disagree on this one. And so I'm expecting to be it'll be 7 hours, but it's going to be pretty lively, I think.
All right. Well, this so the one of the benefits of this will be that you guys get to go into a lot more detail than we're familiar with, and I know this from I do understand that from experience, where someone raises an objection or something, and you're thinking, gosh, it would take 10 minutes to, even begin to address that, and I don't have 10 minutes. I can't even spend 30 seconds on it.
Well, and the other guy will give this 30-minute speech, and then you're supposed to stand up and give like a 10-minute rebuttal on the spot.
Yeah.
It's like boom, 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 boom. It's like,
yeah.
So it's not a good. Normally it's not a good venue, even though we do it all the time. It's like, but so this will be a chance for us to cover more stuff. It isn't just kind of hammering the same point over for 7 hours. That would be interesting. No, it's going to be like covering all sorts of different areas that are relevant to the issue.
All right, so everyone, you can see here the link is in the description box to click on this site, and you can see it's $39.95 to register as of right now. They do have to pay the bills for setting up events like this, and again, I believe that the Apostate Prophet and I will go live that evening to discuss our thoughts on it. I'm a Christian, AP is an atheist, so we'll give our perspective on that. And I was looking at this site here, just wanted to cover one thing. So you have the debate opponents, Dr. Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona, and then you guys give statements on your perspective, but down towards the bottom, I think I saw a statement that was from both of you. And down at the bottom here, it says, whether you are a believer, fundamentalist, evangelical, moderate, liberal, or a non-believer, Jesus is the most significant individual in the history of our civilization. Coming to understand who Jesus actually was and what he actually did and did not do is one of the most important intellectual endeavors anyone in our society can embark upon. But then it's got Dr. Bart Ehrman and Dr. Mike Licona underneath it. So is that both of your perspectives?
Well, certainly my perspective. I'm not a believer, but who could deny that Jesus is the most important figure in the history of civilization? There are 2 billion people, over 2 billion people who worship him. Who else can you say that about a human being? And so, Jesus is incredibly important, and I'm completely committed to understanding who the historical Jesus was, and about his life and what his teachings were, and so I'm completely committed to that because of the supreme importance of it. I agree. I don't think I wrote that statement, but I would completely agree with it.
And just in the name of full disclosure, I've known Mike for over 20 years, so I will be rooting for Mike during this debate, and so we'll all watch it, and I'm sure we'll all have an awesome time. All right, so we have a pretty good mixture of Christian viewers, atheist viewers, and Muslim viewers right now. And so wanted to touch on just a couple issues that are relevant to everyone. But you've interacted in the past, and sometimes you seem a little ticked off, it seems, with the Jesus mythers. So the idea that Jesus did not actually exist. And I was an atheist until I was 20 years old, but that was back in the 90s. And it never crossed my mind that Jesus didn't exist, or we were talking about some sort of mythical figure. So what's your perspective on the idea that Jesus didn't exist?
Well, I know. I've got to figure out a better way to respond to this because I really do get ticked off. my knee starts jerking all over the place. It's a question of it's a question of what history is. if what can you establish as historical fact and what counts as historical evidence? And the mythicists who want to deny that Jesus exists, they might as well deny anything, and they will deny anything. And once you start going down that road, does evidence matter or not? Or can you just make stuff up and convince people? Well, yes, you can and do. And so I just think, but the mythicists always get angry at me because I point out that there's nobody, there's no university or college professor in the country who's an expert in this. And there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of, and they're not just all fundamentalist Christians. I mean, they're people like me and who just think, no, are you kidding me? And so, but they get upset when I say that. And my knee does start jerking, I do admit. But if, Jesus is by far the best documented person from first century Israel. There's nobody even close. He's far better documented than Josephus. Why not deny Josephus existed? He's better sorry.
No, you're good.
I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book about did Jesus exist? And a lot of very conservative evangelicals get very upset with me, but it's nothing like the mythicists. Man, they're really after me.
Yeah. Now, we can believe things and believe them and say, like, I'm 60% sure of this, so I believe it, or 70% sure, 80% sure, or something like that. Based on your studies, when you say that you believe that Jesus existed, are you talking like 60% sure, 80% sure, or 90% sure? Like if you were to put a percentage on it?
I never do percentages with history because I just think that it's kind of a hopeless case. People, especially, I don't know what it is. Maybe there's something about evangelical Christians that I debate that just love statistics. Like Dan Wallace goes around saying things like, we know about 99% of the New Testament is accurate. I go, where do you get this 99% from? What kind of statistical analysis is this exactly? And or Richard Carrier talks about the percentages that Jesus didn't exist. He proves it statistically. Yes, come on. Mm-hmm. So I don't put percentages. I do think things are virtually certain, things are highly probable, things are probable, I do it kind of like, and for me it's between virtually certain and certain that Jesus existed. Mm-hmm. What he said and did is problematic, but it's.
What do you?
I mean, it's not as probable Jesus existed as Donald Trump existed. I mean, it's not that probable, but I mean. How much evidence do you need for somebody in the past existing?
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is fueling? What do you think is fueling this recent rise over the past, I guess, 15 to 20 years? Because again, it never occurred to me back in the 90s, but now all of a sudden I hear it all the time.
It's been around for a long time. This first became an issue during the French Revolution. In the so I mean, we're talking about 18th century. So it's not that this has been invented. Mm-hmm. There have always been people who, and what's behind it is an atheist attempt to show that Christianity is completely bogus. Mm-hmm. And so how bogus is it? The person they worship never even existed. So the thing is, I sympathize with the atheist cause in some ways. I mean, because I'm an agnostic or an atheist too, but I think these people are just shooting themselves in the foot, because if you want to challenge Christianity, you shouldn't do it with an argument that other people laugh at. Mm-hmm. It's not a good idea.
Good advice. Good advice.
So I think there are other things to say, but I just think it's. Look, I won't go into the evidence. It's just like how much.
Yeah. So a sort of related question. It's also very popular, mainly online. I don't hear scholars talking about it, but there's the claim that beliefs about Jesus arose from various Egyptian pagan myths and so on. So they look at the pagan parallels and they'll say belief in the resurrection arose from something with Osiris or something like that. What's your perspective on those parallels? Is that where belief arose?
Yeah, I mean, I cover that in my book, Did Jesus Exist? Because this is an argument that the mythicists themselves also use. My view is that there are a lot of stories about Jesus that do closely parallel stories that you get about other sons of God in the ancient world that were in circulation before Christianity. And so you have people who are born miraculously when a divine being makes a woman pregnant, and people who can do miracles and can heal the sick and cast out demons and raise the dead, and people who ascend to heaven when they die. There are these stories that were around well before Christianity, and I imagine that probably Christians who were grown up in that environment, when they tell stories about Jesus, of course they're affected by the way stories like this are told. I think that's absolutely right. I think, though, that it goes way too far to say that the stories, for example, of Jesus' resurrection were modeled on these Egyptian stories. I mean, what are these people even thinking? The people who started talking about Jesus' resurrection were rural Galilean Jews who had never, the only trip these disciples had ever made in their life was to Jerusalem. They went 100 miles. They didn't know anything about Egyptian culture. How could that possibly have influenced them? And so historically, it's just completely bogus.
So they would. So the belief of the disciples must have arisen from their own local context somehow.
Yeah. No. They yes.
Okay.
I mean, within Judaism, there's a belief that there would be a resurrection of the dead at the end of time, and what the disciples said is that Jesus started it. Mm-hmm. Paul a little bit later said that Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection, meaning that everybody's going to be raised from the dead, and Jesus is the first for it to happen. So this is an internal Jewish development. It's got nothing to do with Osiris in Egypt.
All right, thank you for that. And a quick comment right here, just because we're getting asked here. Hader asked, "Is this a debate or just a discussion?" Yeah, this is not a debate, Hader. This is the debate will be next month. I'm not debating. This is an interview. I'm here to ask Dr. Ehrman his perspective on various issues. So he's an atheist. I'm a Christian. We obviously have disagreements, but yeah, we're not debating right now. Just asking.
Was he asking whether the thing with Michael Licona is going to be a debate or discussion, though?
Oh, that's. I think people are asking, are we debating? Because
you and I are not debating now, although we might. Yeah. But some people have asked me whether, because Mike and I started out thinking maybe we should just make this a discussion, each kind of presenter. But then it's kind of evolved into it's going to be a debate.
Yeah,
it's going to be. It's not going to be go at the jugular kind of debate. Well, it might be. I don't know. But I mean, it's
Yeah. All right, now. So we talked about the Jesus mythers. So on the issue of the historical Jesus, so a Christian would generally go to the Bible, look at the Gospels, and say, here's where I get my beliefs about Jesus. As someone who doesn't believe in the divine inspiration of the text, you've got, the books of the New Testament, which were originally circulating by themselves, and then you have sources outside the New Testament, and then you have, second century sources and so on. I'm not sure there can be any sort of official ranking now, but as someone, if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in Jesus, but is trying to do what you said in the statement on the site, that hey, we should learn about Jesus, what would be like your go-to sources to learn about Jesus?
Well, the only useful sources are the four Gospels. I mean, we have some Gospels from later, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Peter, and they might give us a scrap or two, but basically nothing. And there are no Roman sources that mention Jesus in the entire first century, no Greek or Roman sources outside of the Christian sources and Josephus. Josephus mentions a couple of things, but he doesn't give us anything that's not already in the Gospels. And so for anybody doing the historical Jesus, there's no option. You go with the Gospels. But the historian doesn't treat them as inspired sources in the sense that every word they say is historically accurate, because there's good reasons for knowing that, in fact, they're not always accurate. As Mike Licona himself says, by the way.
So if you take that approach, not taking them as inspired, and you're looking at them as basically historical documents, and as an atheist, I'm assuming you wouldn't believe in that Jesus actually performed miracles and so on. So what would you say, based on the documents that we have available to us, what would you say that we can know about Jesus?
I think we know a lot about him, about what he said and did. And because when whoever wrote the Gospel of Matthew did not think he was writing the Bible. He was writing an account of Jesus' life and his teachings, his activities, and his death and resurrection. So the historian uses that just like the historian would use a source for Napoleon or Julius Caesar. I mean, it's somebody who's favorably inclined. Plutarch, writing a biography, is inclined to appreciate this person he's writing about usually, and so you use it with that in mind. So I've written a lot over the years about what we can say about what Jesus said and did. My first book for a general audience was just on that question. How does a historian approach these sources? And the view that's been around, I'll tell you, my views of Jesus actually today are not different from my views when I was a Christian scholar. Not when I was a fundamentalist or a conservative evangelical, but when I started teaching at Chapel Hill, I was a Christian, went to church every week, taught adult education, but I did not think that Jesus went around calling himself God. I thought that Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, somebody who predicted that, someone who believed that this world is controlled by forces of evil. That's why there's so many awful things happening that we often can't explain, is because there are evil powers in control of this world. And Jesus, as a Jewish person at the time, really thought that. And he also thought that God was ready to intervene to change the entire created order, because he was going to get rid of these forces of evil. He was going to destroy everything opposed to him, including everybody opposed to him, and bring in a good kingdom here on earth that would be ruled by God through his Messiah. And Jesus was expecting this to happen, and he thought it would happen in his own generation. And so that was the heart of his message. As he says throughout the entire Synoptic Gospels, that's what he preaches. Jesus in the early sources, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, does not go around saying, believe in my death and resurrection for your salvation, which became the Christian message. Jesus says, repent because the kingdom of God is at hand. You need to repent and prepare for this kingdom that's coming. And he meant kingdom. He didn't mean heaven. He meant like a kingdom of God here, as other Jews meant. And so I think Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet expecting the end to come soon.
Is there anything, like if you were to make like a little bullet list of things that you would say as a historian that who doesn't believe in divine inspiration, if there were like a bullet list of other things that you agreed or that you could know about Jesus, anything else? So
lots of things. I mean, I think, we can verify. I think there are criteria that historians use for anything. If you want to know about the life of Abraham Lincoln and you've got a bunch of sources, you've got to figure out how to use the sources. And so we use the same criteria for doing the historical Jesus. And when you apply those, there are all sorts of things that Jesus said that he probably said. There are some things that you think, yeah, he probably didn't say that. Mm-hmm. Same with Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. And there are things that he did. I mean, he was certainly baptized by John the Baptist, in my judgment. He had a preaching ministry when he was preaching the coming kingdom. He had 12 disciples around him. He spent most of his time up in Galilee. He was preaching to the people who would listen to him. He had 12 disciples. He went to Jerusalem at the end of his life. He went during a Passover feast, and he got on the wrong side of the law and was crucified by his opponent. I mean, there's a whole list of things you can say that I think are highly probable as coming from the life of Jesus. And there are a lot of things in the Gospels that you say, yeah, probably not.
And you, I saw in your discussion with the apostate prophet, you said that you think Jesus believed he was the Messiah?
Yes, but not in the sense that Christians say that. But when Christians say Jesus is the Messiah, what they typically mean is that Jesus was the one sent by God to die for the sins of the world and to be raised from the dead. There was no Jew in the days of Jesus who thought that's what the Messiah was going to be. There were no Jews who thought that. The Messiah was going to, they had different expectations of the Messiah. So depending which Jewish sources you're reading, but the most common view is that the Messiah was going to be a descendant of David, who, like David, would be a political figure, a warrior, who drove out the enemy and became the king over a sovereign state of Israel. That's the most common view. Other Jews thought that the Messiah would be a cosmic figure who destroyed the forces of evil, God's enemies, and set up a kingdom here on earth, kind of a cosmic judge, one like a son of man, as in the book of Daniel. There are other Jews, the Jews who produced the Dead Sea Scrolls thought there were going to be two messiahs. One apparently was going to be like a political figure who would be subservient to the major messiah, who was a priest, who would interpret God's laws and would rule the people of God with a fist of iron. And so there are various views, but all of these views had in common the idea that the Messiah would be a great figure of grandeur and power who would overwhelm the enemy and set up and rule God's people. Christians, of course, have never said that because Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was crucified. And then they believed he got raised from the dead. And so Christians came up with this idea that the Messiah is not supposed to be any of those things. The Messiah is supposed to be somebody who dies and is raised. And then they turned to their Bible and they found passages that seemed to say that about there's going to be some righteous person who suffers and then God vindicates, like Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22, and there's all these verses most of your listeners will know about. And they claim that's talking about the Messiah. And that's where the idea of a suffering Messiah came from. Those passages, by the way, never talk about the Messiah. Oh yeah, read Isaiah 53 and look for the word Messiah sometime. It's not there.
On another issue about the historical Jesus, I've seen atheists who would say, "Hey, I don't believe Jesus actually performed miracles, but I believe he was known as a miracle worker." So, is your perspective that he was that's how he was known, like similar to the way, like, I would think of Benny Hinn. I don't think he's actually performing miracles, but I think he's known like that. Or is that would you say that's a later Christian invention?
I'm not sure whether it was going on during his lifetime or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it was going on during his lifetime. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened afterwards. The problem today is that when we think about miracles, we have such a different conception of it from people in the ancient world. Because for us, we know about things like natural law. I mean, whether you're a Newtonian or whether you follow Einstein, you've got this view of gravity that it always holds. It does not get violated. It's a law. And in the ancient world, they didn't think about it that way. It's like, there wasn't. The ancient world actually didn't have a realm of the supernatural. This seems weird to us. Because we got the natural thing, we got the supernatural thing, and if there's a miracle, it's the supernatural thing. But the ancient world, they didn't have this division. They didn't even have words for natural and supernatural in the same way. Whatever happens is what the gods want to happen. So if you got a miracle worker, some guy's like, God's making it happen. Well, God makes the sun rise and makes, allow this person to heal the sick. So it's not categorically different the way it is for us. So I have no trouble with believing that people in Jesus' day, they certainly believed other people were doing miracles, and they probably thought Jesus, I guess, maybe thought Jesus was.
On the issue, since you've got the debate coming up next month on the resurrection, a couple issues related to the resurrection. So in order to rise from the dead, Jesus would need to be dead. So are you and Mike going to agree on that?
Well, I hope Mike hasn't changed his mind. Yes, Jesus is dead. Okay. Of course he was dead, yes. We will agree, unless he thinks he wasn't dead.
So no disputing on death by crucifixion?
No.
So the dispute will be whether he was alive again later, obviously, right?
Well, the dispute... So I don't think Mike's going to argue that it was a near-death experience. So he's going to be arguing that it was a resurrection. So there's a difference between a near-death experience or, what used to be more commonly called a resuscitation. There's a difference between a resuscitation and a resurrection. A resurrection means the person doesn't die again. And so the idea of Jesus is not that he was brought back from the dead to live for another 20 years and then die. The way, say, Lazarus, for example, or Jairus' daughter, they would have died again. So the idea of a resurrection is kind of the whole package. He was dead, he was brought back to life, and made immortal.
So since Jesus was dead, it seems like the early Christians were were convinced that he had risen from the dead. And one of the main issues here is that his disciples had some sort of experiences which they interpreted as seeing him post-mortem. So what is your perspective on that? Is that later myth, or were they hallucinating, or?
Well, I think some of them, I don't know. We don't have good records for any of this, unfortunately, because none of the people, none of the disciples who allegedly saw something have left us any records. And so we don't have them saying it. The closest thing we have is Paul, who probably converted 3 years later. It's usually what people suggest, based on doing Pauline chronology is a little bit complicated, but Paul does date something, 3 years later I did this, 12 years, that kind of thing. And when you add it all together, it looks like if Jesus died, say, in the year 30, it looks like Paul converted in the year 33. And Paul, I think, certainly had a vision of Jesus. He thought, by vision, I don't mean it's a hallucination. I mean he saw something, and either it was a hallucination, in other words, the thing wasn't there, or it really was Jesus. But either way, he saw something, and some of the earlier disciples did too. That's why they believed in the resurrection. They absolutely didn't believe because of an empty tomb. The New Testament is clear on this. They believed because they saw Jesus. And I think some of them absolutely saw. I doubt if all 11 did, but my guess is that a couple of them did. Maybe Peter, maybe Mary Magdalene. They're the ones who were first credited with seeing Jesus. And so I think they had some kind of visionary experience. And Christians would say, well, they saw Jesus, he appeared. And non-Christians would say, well, they had hallucinations. But either way, I think they saw something that convinced them that Jesus was raised, yes.
Okay, so I'm guessing that a lot of the debate's going to come down to whether we should take whatever those experiences were seriously.
I take them deadly seriously.
Oh, okay.
I think they saw something.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So they saw something, and the question is, did they see the risen Jesus? That'd be the dispute, or more likely, can we know that what they saw was the risen Jesus? Would that be more accurate?
I absolutely think they believe they saw the risen Jesus. That doesn't mean they saw the risen Jesus. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know all sorts of people who've seen the Blessed Virgin Mary lately. Mm-hmm. So I don't think they did, but they're convinced they did.
All right. Now, so you mentioned Paul. What about James? So, if you just go with the Gospels, doesn't look like James had much confidence in his brother during that time, but later becomes an apostle. So, what's your perspective there?
I don't think we know. I think he certainly came to believe Jesus was raised from the dead, and so it's quite remarkable, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, that Jesus' own brother believed he got raised from the dead. Just think about that for a second. Think about your own siblings for a while. Wow, really? My siblings don't think I'm the Son of God. I got to tell you that. And so, so something remarkable must have happened. It doesn't mean that necessarily he had a personal experience. Paul says he did, and Paul knew him, which, by the way, throws a bit of a monkey wrench in the mythicist argument that Jesus didn't exist.
That's true.
Paul knows his brother.
Yeah.
If Jesus didn't exist, you would think his brother would know about it. It's like, really?
Yeah.
So, but I think James, either people like Peter convinced him that they saw him, or he himself had an experience. Mm-hmm. I think those are the two options.
Mm-hmm. And too bad the mythers weren't there to to tell James that his brother didn't exist.
I know.
Now, on to some other issues on the borderline of Islam and Christianity. We've got Paul, whom you've talked about, and you've got Muhammad, whom you've talked about. Neither one of these guys apparently knew Jesus when he had his earthly ministry. Both of them claim to have received revelations, and both of them went around talking a lot about Jesus. So who would you go with if you had to pick someone talking about Jesus?
Between Paul and Muhammad?
Yeah, as a source.
Muhammad is 500 years later.
Yeah.
And so I don't think anybody claims Muhammad knew Jesus.
Yeah.
Nobody claims Paul knew Jesus. I mean, at least they shouldn't claim that. I mean, Paul didn't. Paul is not from Israel. In the book of Acts, Paul is said to have studied with Gamaliel in Israel, but I don't believe that's true. The book of Acts says he's from Tarsus. I doubt if that's true, too. And he says he's a Roman citizen. I doubt if that's true. I mean, there are reasons for doubting all of these things. But he doesn't say so himself. He says none of that. He doesn't say that. He says nothing about being educated in Jerusalem. And he doesn't give any good evidence of even knowing Hebrew or Aramaic. And so I think that he was Greek. He grew up who knows where, out in the diaspora someplace. And he absolutely didn't know Jesus.
But you mentioned that he knew his brother. So do you think he interacted with the apostles?
Well, he says he did, but he doesn't say what they talked about. So after he converted, it says that he went off to Arabia. He says he went off to Arabia for 3 years. This is in Galatians chapter 1, and I guess I used to think that meant he went off into the desert and meditated for 3 years and had visions and things. But I don't think that's really what he means. Arabia included the Nabatean kingdom, where Petra is. And so I think he probably means that he went to the Nabatean kingdom, and he might have started his missionary work there. But after 3 years, he went to Jerusalem, and he says that he met with Cephas and James. But he insists he didn't meet with any of the other apostles. And I'm not quite sure why he didn't, but he didn't. And he doesn't say what they talked about, except that he spent 2 weeks there. So, of course, our normal assumption is that he'd want to kind of, crib up on what Jesus said and did. I mean, that's what I would have done. But he seems to suggest instead that what he was doing was telling them that he's got this mission to the Gentiles, and he's trying to convince them that these Gentiles do not have to become Jewish to follow the Jewish Messiah. That's certainly the issue when he goes back 14 years later. He spends his time trying to convince them that the Gentiles do not have to keep the law. And so, given the fact that he says hardly anything at all about the historical Jesus in his writings, it's quite remarkable how little Paul tells us about Jesus' life. He says a lot about his death and his resurrection and what he's doing now, but in terms of what Jesus did between the time he was born and the time he died, I have my students, I give them an assignment sometimes. I tell them, list everything Paul says about Jesus' life, everything he said, everything he did between birth and death. They don't need a 3x5 card. It's amazing how little. So if he knew more, he doesn't say much more. So I don't know what he heard from these two.
Mm-hmm. Also on a related issue, since it's interesting. So the disagreement between atheists and Christians wouldn't be about Jesus' death. It would be about whether a miracle occurred and he was resurrected, whereas Muslims have no problem with the resurrection. They have a problem with the idea that Jesus died. And so there are a couple of issues here. But one of the issues is, as you know, Muslims generally believe that the text of the New Testament must have began in some stage where it was a book brought by Jesus. And so it's this book brought by Jesus, and then it later on gets corrupted into eventually the four Gospels we have now. But Muslims here, well, Bart Ehrman talks about all these textual variants, hundreds of thousands of textual variants in the Gospels, and they think, just because I talk to them all the time, but they really think that there are all these different versions of the Gospels that say all these kinds of different things with different doctrines, and that somewhere in there's material that agrees with them on what the Quran says, and then different Gospels elsewhere. And is that what you would get from textual criticism?
No, I tell you, it's not just Muslims, of course. The conservative evangelicals accuse me of say that I say things I just don't say. I just don't know if people can't read anymore or what. But when I talk about all these differences in the manuscripts, it's not a debated point. There are hundreds of thousands of differences. But I also say that most of them are completely immaterial and insignificant. Most of them are misspelled words. It's like there are not variants in the New Testament that say Jesus didn't die, or that Jesus made clay pigeons, or that somebody else got crucified instead of Jesus. No, that's not what I'm talking about. And so they read into what I say, what I don't say, and it's very frustrating. So the variant accounts of Jesus that you get in the Quran, almost all of them are found in later Christian legends before they're in the Quran. For example, Jesus as a boy making clay pigeons or clay birds, or them crucifying the wrong guy, thinking it's Jesus. We have gospel or Christian gospels that have these views that are obviously not in the New Testament, and so the Quran is picking that up from early Christian apocryphal texts, all that stuff from early Christian apocryphal texts, not from variants in the New Testament. And Jesus did not give his disciples a gospel. It's like, where's that coming from? Jesus wasn't literate to begin with. I mean, he probably could read, but nothing suggests he could write, and nothing says he wrote a gospel. So yeah.
So on the issue of sources, because earlier I asked where you would go as a historian, you said the best source would be the New Testament Gospels. So you're saying that these later sources, Arabic or Syriac infancy gospel and so on, where Muslims, where Muhammad was apparently getting information, these wouldn't be on your list of go-to places to learn about Jesus.
My view is that a historian has to look at every possible source and evaluate it critically. So you don't reject anything out of hand. You analyze it because you're desperate for any information you can get. You apply the same criteria to all the sources. When you apply the criteria that historians use to something like the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is one of my favorite non-canonical gospels. It's about Jesus as a boy between the ages of 5 and 12. It's fantastic. I love it. But in terms of its historical value, no, there's nothing there. And so, it's the 4 gospels, yeah.
All right. So just to give one more thing on the issue of textual criticism and basically misunderstandings about what you're claiming, I'll just go ahead and give a quick specific example here. So I'll go to the Gospel of Mark, and I've just pulled up, for instance, Jesus predicting his death when he goes up to Jerusalem. So 8:31, he says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise from the dead. And then 9:30 to 31, and from there they went out and began going through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know about it, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. And then, of course, Mark 10:32 to 34. Now they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise from the dead. So on the issue of textual criticism, it seems like Muslims need textual criticism to lead them to some Jesus who's not predicting his death. Whereas it seems very easy to say, well, I don't believe Jesus predicted his death. I believe that people wrote that back into the accounts after they knew that he had died. But what I'm saying is textual criticism getting to some edition of the Gospel of Mark where Jesus isn't predicting this sort of thing?
Okay, so it's important. I'm not sure that all your listeners will understand exactly what textual criticism is, because people use it in ways that are not the way scholars tend to use it. When a scholar uses the term textual criticism, what they're talking about is if you've got a writing, it doesn't matter whether it's Shakespeare or Plato or the New Testament or anything. Textual criticism tries to find out what the author originally wrote. That's what textual criticism. It's not analyzing the text, interpreting the text, trying to figure out if it's historical or not. It's just figuring out what did the author write. Whether he wrote something that was correct or not is a different issue. Mm-hmm. And so for the example I often use is because, Muslims will say that the Quran is absolutely accurate because none of the copies are different from one another. And that strikes me as a crazy claim. We have millions of copies of Hitler's Mein Kampf, and we know what he wrote. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with whether it's accurate or not. Mm-hmm. It just means we know what he wrote. Textual criticism tries to figure out what a scholar wrote. What an author wrote. Mark wrote those passages. And so there was not an earlier New Testament that was lacking those passages. Those passages were in whatever Mark wrote. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that Jesus said it, but it does mean that it's what Mark wrote. So there are different kinds of analysis. One is figuring out what an author wrote, another is figuring out if what he wrote is accurate or not. They're different things. They're not the same thing. So I know you know that, but some listeners get it confused, and it's important to understand that it's quite different.
So Muslims need some sort of, it's kind of a reverse picture where they need an early Jesus who wasn't crucified, and then somehow this evolved into the story of him dying by crucifixion, and everyone else pretty much believes that you have Jesus dying by crucifixion, and then later you end up with some stories about him not dying by crucifixion, or this ending up, or this being an illusion or something like that. So would you say that as far as the evidence we actually have, you don't have this early evidence of a Jesus who didn't die?
No. Look, the only evidence. So early Christians had different views about Jesus' crucifixion. The only evidence we have of somebody not believing in his crucifixion is a 2nd century gospel that we no longer have, but the church father Irenaeus mentions it by a Gnostic Christian named Basilides. Basilides claimed, seems to be where the Quran's getting it, or something like it. Basilides claims that Simon of Cyrene carried Jesus' cross to the place of crucifixion, and when they got there, Jesus pulled an identity switch. He made Simon of Cyrene look like him, Jesus, and Jesus himself took on the appearance of Simon of Cyrene. So the Romans crucified the one they thought was Jesus, even though it was Simon of Cyrene, and Jesus stood by laughing. He thought he pulled it. Presumably Simon didn't think it was so funny because he's getting crucified because Jesus had pulled this. So that's in this gospel. We don't have the gospel. It was the gospel of Basilides. Some people used it. So that, other than that, everybody agreed that Jesus got crucified. They had different understandings of what it meant. But so this is not like something that was like a widespread belief in early Christianity that he didn't get crucified.
And it's kind of the Muslim perspective now seems to be drawn from that, but the Quran doesn't explain exactly what happened. It just says that they thought they crucified him, but they didn't. It was made to appear to them that way. But the most common Muslim position on that has always been substitution, that Allah substituted someone else, miraculously disguised him and made him look like Jesus. Most Muslims today say Judas, and then this other person was crucified, but everyone thought that it was Jesus. And the weird thing about that is it would actually mean that the reason you right now believe that Jesus died by crucifixion, and the reason I believe that Jesus died by crucifixion, is that Allah did such an amazing job tricking everyone that it became the standard position, and now we all believe it.
Yeah, well, you get that a lot, not just with crucifixion, but yet people say, everybody believes this because the original teaching was X and it got changed early on. The early Christian so-called heretics argued this all the time, is that, it got changed. Those apostles changed it, but we have the truth now. Mm-hmm. And, historians don't do it that way. Historians look for evidence.
Yeah, and I just find that interesting, because if someone says this didn't happen, God actually did a miracle and made you think it happened, I mean, that would explain the evidence. I mean, if God said, "Hey, you think you're talking to Bart Ehrman right now, but you're not. I'm just making you think." Well, that would account for the evidence. It's just kind of a weird explanation.
I used that argument when I was a conservative evangelical, or at least I had friends did, to explain why you have a fossil record. Where the dinosaurs, the devil put them in there. So okay, you don't believe the evidence, you make up some reason to explain the evidence. And so it isn't just Muslims doing this.
And so that goes back to a situation where, I mean, you can explain anything you don't want to agree with, you can explain in that fashion.
Yeah, turn on the news sometime.
Now, just wanted to look at one particular example really quick of what we're talking about with these early sources, because I have the Arabic Infancy Gospel here and I have the Quran. So just wanted to look at one quick passage here. But so we have the Quran and we have Allah comes to, the angel Gabriel goes to Mary and tells her she's going to have a son and so on. And then Jesus is born, and then some Jews want to accuse her of committing a sin because she has a child. And then they come to her and say, "O sister of Aaron, thy father was not a man of evil, nor thy mother a woman unchaste." But she pointed to the babe, so baby Jesus. They said, "How can we talk to one who is a child in the cradle?" He said, "I am indeed a servant of God. He hath given me revelation and made me a prophet." And why that's interesting, it looks like, it really looks like the Arabic Infancy Gospel where Jesus is born, and then he starts speaking, and let me pull it up real quick. And we have Jesus saying in the Arabic Infancy Gospel, he has said that Jesus spoke, there in the middle of the page, he has said that Jesus spoke, and indeed, when he was lying in his cradle, and said to Mary his mother, "I am Jesus, the Son of God, the Logos, whom thou hast brought forth, as the angel Gabriel announced thee, and my Father has sent me for the salvation of the world." It actually looks like Muhammad isn't just drawing on these stories. It looks like he's just taking them and modifying them, so that instead of Jesus saying, "I'm the Son of God sent for the salvation of the world," he says, "I'm a servant of Allah sent with revelation, and I'm a prophet."
Yeah, makes sense to me. I mean, it's clear. If you've got stories that are like that prior to the Quran and they're very similar to the Quran, then it's not an accident. But it's like, going back to the earlier thing, it's not an accident that you have these stories of other divine men in the Greek and Roman world before Jesus who were born miraculously, do miracles and raise the dead and stuff. I mean, it's not an accident that you have these similar stories.
What's interesting is that right after that passage of Jesus speaking, even though it's not mentioned anywhere in the text that Jesus that there's anything about the Son of God in the passage in the Quran, immediately after the passage, it says Allah does not have a son, he has no need. He just has to say be, and it is. And so the question is, what is Allah responding to if there hasn't been any discussion of Jesus being the Son of God?
That's good. No, that's good. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that's a good piece of evidence. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so
if people didn't pick up what you were saying, it shows that the story originally had him talking about being a son. Mm-hmm. Not a servant. Right?
Yeah, so it looks like Allah is actually responding to people asking him about this story or something like that.
No, that's good. Yeah.
All right, one more issue, and this is kind of weird, but I have a short video clip, and I just like your reaction, because when I react to it, they say I'm a Christian trying to cover up the truth, but there are people who try to line up with scholarship and so on. Like Shabir Ali is a Muslim, but he reads James Dunn and Raymond Brown and so on, and tries to interact with that material. But then there are others who, I don't know, it just seems like in the age of the internet, you can say anything you want, no matter how far away from anything remotely resembling scholarship. Now, I don't know, because you may watch this and say, "Oh, actually, yeah, here, I know what he's talking about. I can't figure out what he's talking about." But I'd like your perspective on a clip from Sheikh Yusuf Estes. The clip is from a Catholic woman asks him a question about how he became a Muslim and so on. He starts interacting with her. But then Sheikh Yusuf Estes explains the origin of the Catholic Church. And I wanted to bring this up just because the clip has millions of views, and there are people who take him seriously on this. So
Okay.
Ready to watch a video clip? All right.
You might think I'm a Catholic, I'll never be anything but a Catholic. But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up, because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great. Do you know what the word Catholic means? It means universal. It was the universal church for the Roman Empire. If you didn't join it, you could not be a Roman citizen. And it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism and opposed to the teachings of the early Christians for more than 200 and some years. And they were diametrically opposed to each other to the extent that it was the Romans killing the early Christians. Now, if you understand that and you go to their website and read, they didn't even take over Christianity until the year 325 AD. And when they did, they changed a lot of things, again, referring to their own website. But if you want to check it in Britannica or Americana or Grolier encyclopedias, go ahead and read about the Catholic Church.
All right. Well, I heard you laughing at that. So why were you laughing?
Wow. No, it's just completely ignorant. It's not just, it's like, he just doesn't know. He's like, that is one of the stupidest things I've heard in a long time. That Alexander the Great started the Roman Catholic in Rome? What? I mean, okay, just ask him to read a book about Alexander the Great sometime. how much time he spent in Rome, and how could what's he even think? What? I mean, it's like, no, I'm sorry. That's way down there in the realm of stupidity. It's just, why do people do this in public? At least read something. And, I mean, just virtually everything he says was wrong, except, of course, Jesus was not a Catholic. No. But, I mean, apart from that, everything he says is wrong. And not just like my opinion wrong. I mean, it's just wrong. How funny. Okay, yeah, well, millions of people are watching that instead of your show.
All right. Well, I have to say I'm glad you said that, because I was a little nervous you're going to say, oh, yeah, I know about a source that he's talking about and so on. Because
he's making it up.
Yeah.
He missed the article. He read 300 and he thought it meant 300 BC.
And somehow, but it's Alexander the Great, too. So it's.
Yeah, well, that's about when Alexander was, so it must have been him. And, he's hanging out in Rome, starting a church.
It's Rome. That's what Alexander did. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so that's actually a good lead into us wrapping things up here, because there are tons of fans of Sheikh Yusuf Estes who would believe their guy because he's their guy. So they would believe their guy because he's their guy, and there are atheists who would listen to Richard Dawkins, or your fans would listen to you, and there are Christians who would go with our guy. But sometimes we can be wrong about things, and so we shouldn't just go along with what our guy says. We should want to verify that what everyone is saying is correct. Yes,
it's not about who says it. Whoever says it's got nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong. You got to look at the evidence. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my God, no, I'm sorry. I mean, you cannot follow somebody who says crazy things just like the way he says things. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Ehrman, and everyone. The point of me wrapping up like that was, we have a debate. In case you weren't here at the beginning, we have a debate next month, Dr. Bart Ehrman versus Dr. Michael Licona, on whether the resurrection of Jesus actually happened. The link to that event is in the description box. As I mentioned before, click that link, go ahead and register for the event. And hopefully a bunch of us can all watch it on that day. And then the Apostate Prophet and I, an atheist and a Christian, get together with all of you and watch it afterwards. So we can all hopefully learn about someone who, as Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona agree with, is the most important figure in civilization. And so, Dr. Ehrman, thank you for joining us. Any final thought before I click off here?
I'll just say that when people listen to a debate, they should do it with a fairly open mind. It's not they have to agree they're going to change their mind, but they need to be able to agree that, yeah, actually that's a good argument. I have to think about that, rather than just writing everything off because they disagree. Because otherwise, there's no point watching it. You're just confirming And so I think debaters too. They have to listen to the other side and pay attention. And I hope the people in this debate do that, because it's going to be an important and interesting debate.
All right. Well, thank you, and hope to see everyone there next month joining us, watching it online. Catch you all then.